And here we're going to talk about the consequences of the changes in terms of trade. And there are actually two that I want to explore in this presentation. First of all, it's the impact on global output and income redistribution and impact on the current account. Well, for the impact on global output and income redistribution, it is actually quite straightforward. First of all, as the name suggests, global output and income will be redistributed. But why? Countries with improving terms of trade will gain with lower opportunity cost of imports. What does this mean? What this means that, and everything I'm saying here is everything else is constant, ceteris paribus. With the increase in the price of exports and a decrease in the price of imports, right? That means that they are more readily able to finance those imports because exports, which is the stuff that they are selling, is more expensive, assuming that quantities are staying constant. And countries with deteriorating terms of trade will lose, okay? Because basically what's happening here is that the imports are getting more expensive and they will need to sell more of those exports, which in this case may involve a decrease in the export prices to finance those imports. And here we have a redistribution of income because countries which are able to command high prices for exports will earn more money over the long term, whilst poor countries which has lower export prices, and a lot of time these are developing countries which sells kind of cheaper agricultural products, they will lose out in this case. And over the long run, they may suffer from lower levels of income and in which translates in lower levels of GDP. Now let's look at the impact on the current account. A change in the terms of trade leads to the improvement in the balance of trade if it can lead to an increase in the value of exports or a decrease in the value of imports. And this is shown by the mathematical formula here. If Px multiply Qx, which is the value of export, goes up, then there is an improvement in the balance of trade. And similarly, if the value of imports goes down, there will be an improvement in the balance of trade, okay? And when we talk about an improvement in the balance of trade, it's either a smaller balance of trade deficit. So that means that balance of trade is still negative, but it's less negative, okay? Or basically a larger balance of trade surplus. But all in all, it's the balance of trade value will be going up. Let's look at the change in terms of trade due to a change in demand, okay? And here, we're just looking at from the perspective of the value of exports, which is price of exports multiplied by quantity of exports. Let's say that the example we're looking at here is cars, okay? And the equilibrium price here is P1Q1. Given an increase in the demand for cars, D1 will shift outwards to D2 because there's an increase in the demand for car exports at each and every price level. Therefore, the price of the car will increase from P1 to P2, okay? That's the global price of the cars. There is an improvement in the terms of trade. What about from the balance of trade perspective? When the price increases, okay, and the quantity also increases, surely the value of exports would increase as well. And holding the value of imports constant, the balance of trade also increases, okay? So the balance of trade value also increases. A terms of trade improvement from P1 to P2 increases the value of the exports, which improves the value of the balance of trade. On the other hand, when the demand falls, okay, from D1 to D3, prices drop from P1 to P3, okay, and the quantity drops from Q1 to Q3. What happens here is that there's a deterioration in terms of trade. Remember, we're only looking at prices, and this is obvious because the price has dropped from P1 to P3. What about the value of exports? Since price and quantity has also gone down, surely the value of exports has also gone down, okay? A deterioration in the terms of trade is also met with a deterioration in the balance of trade. And therefore, in this case, the terms of trade and the balance of trade changes in the same direction. If the prices increase, value of the balance of trade through the enhanced value of exports also increase. If the price decrease, then the value of the balance of trade through the fall in the value of exports also decrease. The situation is actually a bit more complex when we are reviewing the supply side, okay? The change in terms of trade due to a change in supply. Again, we have a similar setup here, okay? If the supply for cars increases, okay, S1 shifts out to S3 because more can be supplied at each and every price level, and the price drops down to P3, which is a deterioration in terms of trade, but yet the quantity increases from Q1 to Q3. So here we have a situation of a deterioration in terms of trade, but has the value of exports improved? Because whilst prices have gone down, quantity of exports has gone up. And what about for the situation when supply is reduced? Here, this is represented by a leftward shift in the supply curve from S1 to S2 as less can be supplied at each and every price level. Prices have gone up from P1 to P2, which is an improvement in the terms of trade. However, the quantity drops from Q1 to Q2. So whilst there's an improvement in the terms of trade, what about the value of exports? Has it gone up or has it gone down? And the answer is actually ambiguous. It depends, okay? What does it depend on? The terms of trade and the balance of trade changes in the same or opposite direction depending on the price elasticity of demand for exports and imports. Okay, so let's take a look at the case if the PED for exports is inelastic, okay? And here I've just popped the equation for balance of trade at the top just to remind you what it is. And we're focusing on exports and hence the highlight in red. And here we're seeing that the potatoes have a relatively inelastic demand curve and a decrease in price occurs, okay? As can be seen in the diagram on the left, the demand curve here is steeper and hence it is shown to be more inelastic. So what happens when a decrease in the price occurs? Well, obviously, according to the law of demand, the quantity demanded would increase, okay? However, the increase in the quantity of potato exports is proportionally smaller than the fall in export prices. And therefore, we'll see a fall in the value of potato exports. Why is this the case? Because when the price of exports goes down significantly and quantity only increases a little bit, okay, from Q1 to Q3, the value of exports would go down. And so in this case, when we have a deterioration in the terms of trade, okay, which is from P1 to P3, okay, a fall from P1 to P3, it will also cause a deterioration in the balance of trade. And similarly, if you look at the reverse, it's also true as well. When you have a huge price increase, let's say here from P1 to P2, okay, according to the law of demand, less will be demanded. But here it is only a little bit less, which is going to be demanded from Q1 to Q2. Therefore, big price increase, small quantity decrease, the export value will increase. The terms of trade and the balance of trade changes in the same direction. Well, what about if the PED of exports is elastic? Same setup, as you can see. And we're looking at bottled water, okay? It has a relatively elastic demand where PED is greater than 1. This can be shown on the left where the demand curve is relatively flatter, right? And let's just imagine here, if there's an increase in the supply of bottled water from S1 to S3, prices drops, okay, from P1 to P3, and the quantity demanded increases from Q1 to Q3. As you can see, the increase in the quantity of its bottled water exports is proportionately greater than the fall in the export price. Small decrease in price, P1 to P3, large increase in the quantity of exports. And therefore, there is an increase in the value of the bottled water exports, okay? And in this case, the country's deterioration in its terms of trade, fall in the price from P1 to P3, will actually cause an improvement in the balance of trade. And on the other hand, let's look at the case where supply reduces from S1 to S2. The price will increase from P1 to P2, small increase in price. But look at that decrease in the quantity of bottled water. It's significant from Q1 to Q2, okay? And therefore, when the country's terms of trade improves, because the prices increase, okay, the price of exports increase, it will actually lead to a deterioration in the balance of trade because a lot less people are buying it, and therefore the revenue will drop significantly. Okay, so let's look at the role of PED for imports. And here we are assuming that the demand is inelastic. I've popped the equations up on top, okay, again, and the focus is on the value of imports, highlighted in red. Assume that here the country only imports tomatoes, okay? So in this case, if the price of tomatoes goes down, okay, the price of the import of tomato goes down significantly, okay, then it is an improvement in the terms of trade, okay? And given that the demand is inelastic, a decrease in the price of imports means that the quantity of imports demanded will be proportionately less than the decrease in price. Hence, the value of imports will be smaller than if the demand for imports is elastic, okay? And therefore, there is an improvement in the balance of trade. An improvement in the terms of trade leads to an improvement in this balance of trade and vice versa, okay? And if we just look at this from the other perspective, if the prices increases significantly, okay, so that's a deterioration in the terms of trade. Because the demand is inelastic, they will only buy a little bit less. Therefore, the value of imports will increase. When you have the value of exports minus a larger number, that is a deterioration in the balance of trade. Let's look at the case where demand for imports is price elastic. Again, we're focusing on imports by the red writing. Assume that the country only imports computers, okay? Typically, the products like computers are more elastic. If the prices decrease a little bit, because of the elastic demand, people will buy a lot more. QM will increase significantly. Therefore, in this case, the value of the imports would increase. And an improvement in the terms of trade, therefore, leads to a deterioration in the balance of trade. Why is it vice versa? Let's look at the case where the prices of computer imports increase. Given that it is an elastic demand curve, when the price of imports increase, that is a deterioration in the terms of trade, okay? And what happens to the quantity of imports? The quantity of imports drops significantly, okay? And therefore, the value of imports would go down, and there's an improvement in the balance of trade, okay? A deterioration in the terms of trade will lead to an improvement in the balance of trade. When the price of imports decrease, that is an improvement in the terms of trade. When the price of imports increase, that is a deterioration in the terms of trade. So just to summarize, okay, if the PED of exports is less than 1, and the same case for the PED of imports, the terms of trade and the balance of trade will both improve or both deteriorate. They change in the same direction. On the other hand, if the PED of exports is larger than 1, or when the PED of imports is larger than 1, an improvement in the terms of trade will lead to a deterioration in the balance of trade and vice versa. They change in opposite directions. And here I just thought it might be interesting for you to know that when the PED of exports is larger than 1, or when the PED of imports is larger than 1, isn't this very similar to the Marshall-Lerner condition? Wouldn't a deterioration in terms of trade, which in this case is the declining price of exports, which in the case of the Marshall-Lerner condition is achieved through deterioration, wouldn't that lead to an improvement in the balance of trade? Just a food for thought. What about the changes in terms of trade due to changes in exchange rates? The price of imports and exports is influenced by the domestic price and also the exchange rate. Assume that the exchange rate is $1 US to £1. The American imports a pen from the UK at a cost of £10, which is equivalent to $10. If the dollar depreciates by 50%, $1 is equals to half a pound, or £1 is equals to $2. The same pen that cost £10 before now requires $20 as opposed to $10. So in this example here, I'm just showing you the case where the price of imports is actually influenced by the exchange rate as well, even if the price of the penny in the UK doesn't change. Here, a depreciation or devaluation of the currency is the same as a deterioration in the terms of trade, because in this case, a depreciation of the currency leads to lower export prices and higher import prices. On the other hand, an appreciation or revaluation of the currency is the same as an improvement in the terms of trade. Okay? Appreciation of the currency is because exports are now selling at a higher price. Okay? Imports are now cheaper. Isn't that the same as an improvement in terms of trade? Well, a depreciation or devaluation of the currency will only lead to an improvement in the balance of trade only if the Marshall-Lerner condition is satisfied, which is the PD of imports plus the PD of exports is greater than 1. Okay, and if you want to know why this holds, please watch the video on the Marshall-Lerner condition. What about changes in terms of trade due to changes in inflation? Well, the result is ambiguous. Why? Let me look at my notes. I really forgot. You can't expect me to know everything, right? Okay, so one reason is that in a flexible or managed exchange rate system, a change in the rate of inflation is likely to lead to a change in the exchange rates, which in turn will have their own effects on the terms of trade and balance of trade. And in addition, an increase in the rate of inflation may lead to governments or central bank policies to deal with this, which in turn sets in motion of a series of events with their own effects on the terms of trade and balance of trade. And here, this is a case where it's like playing dominoes. You push one domino, which is the inflation changes, it may set off another chain of effects, which is hard to predict its impact on the balance of trade. Okay? So guys, here you have it. I've talked a lot about the terms of trade today. Make sure you know the mathematical formula for terms of trade, the causes of the terms of trade, the consequences of the terms of trade, especially on the redistribution of income globally and the balance of payments. Okay, so guys, take care. Until next time. Bye-bye.